So, I don't know if you've noticed, but we're in hell.
In the early days of Twitter, it was like a place of radical de-shaming. Voiceless people realized that they had a voice, and it was powerful and eloquent. If a newspaper ran some racist or homophobic column, we realized we could do something about it. We could get them. We could hit them with a weapon that we understood, but they didn't. A social media shaming. This was like the democratization of justice. Hierarchies were being leveled out. We were going to do things better. And it began to feel weird and empty when there wasn't a powerful person who had misused their privilege that we could get. A day without a shaming began to feel like a day picking fingernails. It's a very human thing to do, to dehumanize the people we hurt. It's because we want to destroy people, but not feel bad about it. You know, when we watch courtroom dramas, we tend to identify with the kind-hearted defense attorney, but give us the power, and we become like hanging judges.
Hello, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I am an author, robot, and all-around honest person. Today, we're going to be talking about the RWA, because guess what? The drama with them is still going on. That's right. Now, if you remember a video I did last month, I released it on December 30th. It was regarding a certain situation called I Stand with Courtney versus the racist RWA. If you did not get to see that video, I'll link it down below in the description and at the end of this video, which will catch you up on the drama back at that time. Right now, we're going to get to some of the new information that I found, which includes, hang in there with me, super exciting, the smoking gun. We've got some of the example tweets that started this whole firestorm. We've also got some information of how it really snowballed and then came to the attention of Courtney Milan. She wasn't there at the beginning. However, I have been discovering that she has a tendency to have a nose for these kinds of stories. And by that I mean she likes to follow them and become a part of them. First, we've got this article from Vox.com. You know, everything that I talk about in this video will be linked in the description down below so that you can do your own research and let me know what you find. And as always, if you have any information, if I miss anything, if I misinterpret anything, feel free to leave me in the information down below. So from Vox.com, we've got romance is publishing's most lucrative genre. Its biggest community of writers is imploding. The influential trade organization Romance Writers of America is tangled in a web of racism, accusations, power grabs, and shadow plots. This article I specifically like because it's more of the leftist perspective, so we get more of an idea of Courtney Milan's side. FYI, as of recording this, I am still blocked by Courtney Milan. I have never interacted with her. The only thing that has caused me to be blocked is to ask questions. If Courtney Milan would like to contact me and give me her side of the story, I am more than happy to listen. That's all that I ask for. So in getting into this article, the romance writing community's biggest professional organization is in shambles due to an institutional meltdown over racial politics. It's a giant imbroglio involving questions of how to bring progressive change to a 40-year-old organization whose membership is increasingly diversifying and the ramifications about much more than romance. Formed in 1980 by the groundbreaking Black romance editor Vivian Stevens, Romance Writers of America is a trade organization that essentially functions as a union for its 9,000 members, most of whom are published or aspiring romance authors. Its major annual awards, the Rita Awards, are the most prestigious honors in the romance writing community, and past winners have included best-selling romance titans like Nora Roberts, Diana Gabaldon, and Julia Quinn. But on January 6th, the RWA announced it would cancel the 2020 Rita ceremony previously scheduled for July as part of the annual National RWA Conference, after many nominees withdrew their work from consideration and many judges said they would no longer participate. Then, on January 8th, major romance novel publishers like Harley Quinn and Avon began to withdraw from attending the RWA National Conference, putting the event in jeopardy as well. And on January 9th, both the new RWA president, Damon Suede, whose who'd only officially held the role for about 2 weeks, and the organization's executive director, Carol Ritter, resigned. Contacted by Vox for comment, the RWA referred to its official announcement of Suede's departure and clarified that Ritter, who is staying for several months to assist with the organization's transition, will not have another staff role following her departure. These developments are the latest in an ongoing spiral into institutional chaos and backlash that began just before Christmas when the board of RWA suspended one organization's most popular members, Courtney Milan, for publicly critiquing perceived racism and racist writing by other members. The board's decision initially caused outrage and eventually betrayed a massive institutional failure, as emerging details revealed to shocked RWA members that Milan's suspension was built on a lie and mirrored in mysterious back-channeling, all in what seems to have been a concerted attempt to oust Milan, who some members may have perceived as a progressive rabble-rouser from a position of influence within RWA. I want to see some of this evidence right here that it was all back-channeling and that she had done no wrongs. That in itself might not be enough to seriously threaten the institution's survival, but Milan is a beloved author of color fighting against systemic racism in an organization with a long, fraught history of sidelining or overtly offending marginalized authors. Now, many of its members are giving up the fight, and RWA's pledges to change may not be enough to save it. I have to click what these mean because I really don't. 50 Shades of White, the long fight against racism in romance novels. Oh yeah, this is the article. This is the article with somebody complaining about how nipples are usually pink. Because this woman is going, I have brown nipples in my book. We're tired about reading about pink nipples. Okay, then write about non-pink nipples. That's not racism. I'm sorry. This one is just complaining about no black romance authors have ever won the Rita Awards. How about perhaps they're not submitting, and if they're not submitting, or if they are submitting, maybe it's not up to par. There was this thing with Stephen King earlier this week where Stephen King said when it comes to art, it should never be about diversity, it should be about the quality of the art. And all of these people decided that they were going to take offense that, well, saying quality to art means that it can't be non-white people. No, it means you don't take into consideration the race of the person. You take into consideration the quality of the work. And if you're assuming that somebody who's not white can't hit quality, then you're the racist. But we're saying don't pay attention, don't give extra points to somebody because of their race. Just look at the work. I know that's kind of a hard concept for some people. But, try to imagine it. If I read your book and I'm not at all thinking about who is the writer of this book, just how well it's written, if I enjoy it, what the characters are like, maybe that's the way to grade it. Part of the thing was, this came up this week during the talk about Stephen King. And a lot of people were mentioning, well, you have to take out the white people in order to put people of color in because there's an inherent bias in the white authors and the white judges. You have to take out the white judges and replace them with non-white judges because the white judges have a bias. And so I mentioned, so what you're saying is you're assuming that certain people have certain biases and against you or against people that you're thinking of, and so you would like to replace people that you perceive have biases against you and replace them with people who you perceive have biases for you. I pointed out that that is not ethical, and I was told that that is the idea of a white supremacist, that you cannot take somebody out based on you can't remove somebody from a position based on the color of their skin when you're making assumptions about where they're coming from. So you have to assume that other people have the same biases as you, that they are going to be as preferential as you, and assume guilt without any evidence. And I also mentioned this, in that I don't assume somebody has committed some kind of crime or has some kind of bias without evidence. So then they try to say that there is no assumption of some crime or being committed or anything, but we have to watch out for these biases because they're just there. If you assume that everybody has that bias and is picking because of favoritism, that is because that is how you operate. And you are actually saying to replace people for those that have preferences for you. You are the one being unethical. I'm sorry. If you can't prove that somebody has a bias and that certain people are winning or, being chosen because of their background, then you're pushing guilt onto somebody without evidence. And if you can assume that somebody has a bias and is choosing all of their winners or all of their favorite books based on your assumption because they have to prove that they're not guilty, then you have to prove to me that you have never raped and killed a 5-year-old child, because it's the same thing. I'm going to just assume the worst of you until you prove to me otherwise. And the thing is, you can't. You can't prove to me that over however many years you've lived, there has not been a moment where you haven't committed this crime, because you can't prove a negative. You can only prove a positive because there's evidence left behind. So if you go in assuming somebody is guilty and they have to prove that they're not guilty, it's an impossible task, and we cannot have that standard. And there's no way that you can defend yourself because there is no evidence. It's the Gestapo. Okay, I've said the Gestapo in the last video, and this is the romance Gestapo. We're about to get into this magazine cover. So 4 times a year, as far as I'm aware, the RWA releases a magazine, a quarterly magazine, right? And that's pretty typical for organizations. And so when you're doing a big project like a magazine, you kind of plan it in advance, because you got to have your articles picked out, you got to have your subjects picked out. If you're doing interviews in there, if you're doing special contest listings, special opportunities, you have to have all of this planned out. And you also have the focus of the magazine, because every single freaking writing magazine has a focus, which has the cover story that is referenced on the inside. And as we obviously know, the RWA has been having issues with trying to appease certain people and show, hey, look, we're trying to help the marginalized people for the last so long. And so everything is planned in much in advance, at least 3 months. Insider information says they plan these at least 3 months in advance, and I can believe that. And so then you have this magazine come out for January, which, if you go by the 3-month rule, this was planned back in October. And the image is obviously, we have it right here. We've got a white woman helping a black woman up a hill. Now, or up a mountain to reach the goal. Now, this goes with the whole idea. I think it's a tacky cover. Personally, I would not have done this. However, as you can imagine, certain people found this offensive, and as soon as this magazine came out, you had an uproar of, this is offensive, this is tone deaf, blah, blah, blah. But let's look at this from the perspective of the RWA, who is trying. They hear that they're racist. They hear that they have to use their power and their privilege to help lesser privileged people, to help elevate marginalized people, marginalized voices, specifically people of color and LGBT people, people with a different voice. And so if you personally believe this, if you personally believe that as a white person, you have more privilege that you have to use to help somebody else, what is going to come to mind? It's going to be this image of, hey, look, I'm trying to help you with the better footing that I have so that you can get higher and we can work together to benefit both of us. That's what you're going to think when you're looking at this. However, the progressives in this community had a different image in mind when they saw this. And many members turned it into this. Keep this in mind for the whole rest of these interactions with the RWA. If your goal over here is to use your footing to help somebody who has not as good footing get, higher up with you, they don't want to work together. This is very clearly an image of their MO, which is, get out of here. I'm going to go up by myself, and I don't want you anywhere near me. So whatever you do to help is never going to be enough unless you just fall off the mountain and break your neck. Sorry. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Keep that in mind with these interactions, that they have created this image that represents what they want. In a December board meeting, the RWA voted to suspend and permanently ban from leadership one of its most famous members, Courtney Milan. Milan is known for historical novels containing progressive social elements like interracial relationships and proto-feminist heroines. She served on the RWA board from 2014 to 2018 and won an RWA Service Award in 2019 for her leadership promoting diversity within the organization. Milan was serving as a chair of the RWA Ethics Committee in August of 2019 when she participated in the widespread social media conversation regarding 2 editors from the same small publishing house, Glenfinnian. The conversation started when Carolyn Jewell, who was then the president-elect of the RWA, blocked one of the editors, Sue Grimshaw, on Twitter. After she noticed Sue Grimshaw had liked a series of tweets Jewell perceived as racist, including a tweet questioning whether white supremacy was real. From there, many people, including Milan, took part in the discussion about Grimshaw and her alleged history of gatekeeping books by authors of color. So here's our first example. Now, get ready, trigger warning. I should warn you really quick. Trigger warning. Okay, you're ready. We're going to look at these racist tweets. And I have some questions. Let's first start out with Ella Drake's framing of the situation. She says, "Saw some hints, so I had to investigate, because I don't care if this person in romance publishing knows I hate her politics, because the GOP is trash and it makes me question her humanity." Right there, she says this is completely about politics. She is dehumanizing this person.
It's a very human thing to do, to dehumanize the people we hurt. It's because we want to destroy people, but not feel bad about it.
She liked this bullshit. And we start off, I don't know why this Women of Christ is in here. I don't know if that's supposed to be racist. Jesus never said it would be easy, but he said it would be worth it. Because also you see at the bottom here, at the bottom of this tweet, there's a Charlie Kirk tweet. And if you're not involved in politics, you're probably not going to know who Charlie Kirk is, but he is technically a conservative speaker. I think it's president of Turning Point USA. If not president, he's up there in the organization. And Turning Point USA is a conservative club that kind of goes around campuses and talks about conservative ideas at universities. So considering his tweet is cut off here at the bottom, I don't know why this specific screenshot wouldn't slide down to show the Donald Trump tweet and then the Charlie Kirk tweet, but actually kind of features the Women of Christ tweet, the Trump tweet, and then cuts off Charlie Kirk. I don't know if this Christ tweet is supposed to mean anything as a racism. Let me know in the comments below. Then, of course, we have a Donald Trump tweet, which just says, "My time spent in Daytona and El Paso with some of the greatest people on earth. Thank you for a job well done." And then Charlie Kirk's tweet that cuts off with, "ICE just arrested 680 illegal alien workers in Mississippi." A second image that we have here shows a Diamond and Silk tweet that says, "White supremacy was created by white liberal Dems to intimidate black people. If Dems thought hate was an issue, why won't they denounce Antifa? Is Antifa the modern day white supremacists used to intimidate people because of color of their politics?" Diamond and Silk links to a Tucker Carlson video. And then again, you have another Charlie Kirk tweet that says, "Hillary Clinton called Trump supporters deplorable. Peter Strotz said he could smell Trump supporters at a Virginia Walmart. Democrats call us racist or white supremacists. The left doesn't even hide their contempt for Americans anymore." And then the final tweet listed here is another one. It looks like there's another Women of Christ tweet that's cut off. Another Charlie Kirk, which is, "Why is the media saying that Trump's fault 21 people died in El Paso, but it isn't Elizabeth Warren's fault 9 died in Ohio?" Another Women of Christ tweet that says, "Dear God, I want to take a moment not to ask for anything from you, but simply to say thank you for all I have." And then there's a Julie Bennett tweet that cuts off. I don't know who Julie Bennett is. It just says, "I don't want to mention names, but someone was just kicked out of the family pool party / cookout for eating." So I'm assuming that's not white supremacist, but I could be wrong. So these are the smoking guns, as far as I can see. And if you recall, in my previous video, I was going around asking Twitter, what were these tweets that were so racist? Could anybody tell me what was racist? Okay, and I came to the eventual conclusion that, so this is just about politics. It is just about hating Trump. And I had a couple of people go, yes, it's about hating Trump. How can this not be how can writing not be political? Blah, blah, blah. So what that says to me is that this whole situation is the RWA is turning from a writing organization into a political PAC. I know political PAC is a bit redundant because PAC stands for Political Action Committee, and that is groups of people that take action in favor of specific political ideas or parties. And so if you're ousting romance authors because they don't abide by certain political ideologies, that means that you have commandeered what was a writing community and turned it into a political community. And that's not what people are there for. Getting back to the Vox article, several participants in the discussion, including Milan, then also examined a book by another Glenfinnian editor, Catherine Len Davis, and noted its use of racist stereotypes. The book, Somewhere Lies the Moon, was published in 1999 and contained passages in which Chinese women are described as inherently demure and quiet and modest and submissive. So, number one, I didn't mention this super long in my first video because I don't think that you should have to qualify anything like this, but I don't think you should ever have to justify, well, I wrote this, but it was, 30 years ago, I wrote this and it was 20 years ago and it was okay then and it's not okay now. You're telling a story. You're talking about the life of people. You're talking about a culture. You're talking about a time. Even if I'm writing a book right now in 2020 and I set it back in 2020 or in 1920, or I have a character in my 2020 book from 1920, I'm going to copy those mannerisms. I don't care what year it is. I'm telling a story of specific people, and we have to stop with this censorship book burning because something is too sensitive for somebody to deal with. Look at them getting rid of To Kill a Mockingbird. Look at them getting rid of Huckleberry Finn. Look at them getting rid of all of these very specific books because, my sensibilities hurt. Humanity is a mess. Humanity has always been a mess. And if you can't handle a couple of words on a page or the idea of a certain type of situation, it's going to be real rough out there. You're going to have a tough time. It's probably better that you come into these words inside of Huckleberry Finn or To Kill a Mockingbird, because what are you going to do when you run into it in real life? Honey, books are a safe space, because at least if you don't like the content, you can close the book and not pick it up again. Honey. So anyways, she was getting reamed. There are a lot of people that will talk about this, though, that she was getting reamed for a book that was written 20 years ago, and it is true. We have to stop judging people by today's we have to stop judging people from the past or moments from the past by today's standards. We have seen this with ideas of racism now being applied to founding fathers or to other historical figures and saying, well, we have to get rid of all of these things because they were immoral, but we're not taking the standards of the time into consideration. Or, the people that are trying to ban or erase people from history are not taking into consideration what was actually considered moral at that time. You cannot apply current standards to another period. You just can't, because people have been different all throughout the ages. Imagine when America was first founded, and even 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, we had different rules when it came to animal testing. We had different rules when it came to nuclear waste. We had different rules and laws and what was considered moral when it came to health and when it came to environmental protections. Our morality towards situations, toward the law, towards life has changed dramatically over decades. From year to year, it's different now than it was in 2010. So we cannot punish somebody today for what is the norm today but was not the norm in 1999, okay? The article says, as a result of these social media conversations, Glenfinnion's publisher, Susan Tisdale, along with Davis, filed complaints against Milan in August and September. The complaints alleged that Milan's outspoken social media critique had caused both of them to lose business opportunities. Tisdale and Davis, who are both white, were upset that Milan, who is of Chinese descent, had used social media, and particularly Twitter, where she has more than 30,000 followers, to call out Grimshaw and Davis's alleged racism. Milan terrifies people into remaining silent simply because of her reach on Twitter. People are genuinely afraid of being on her list, Tisdale's complaint read. Tisdale also suggested that Milan chairing the RWA Ethics Committee was akin to putting a neo-Nazi in charge of the UN Human Rights Committee. Miss Milan is not what the face of the RWA needs. So it's kind of interesting that they do feel the need to put the race of the people up here as if that, changes anything. But it's also interesting that they didn't mention that Courtney Milan is actually mixed race. And I have personally been wondering that if Milan is part Chinese, part white, does that count that she's also part oppressor? Like, if that's how we're playing this game, is Milan part oppressor as well? And is she kind of partially to blame for her own oppression? Honest question. In her complaint, Davis asserted that Milan had unfairly trashed her book. Quote, Milan quashes creativity and growth through the use of terror tactics, she wrote. Davis also claimed her book is immune to racialized critique because it was written in the 1990s and is historically accurate, which makes it both immune from and irrelevant to current judgment of racist literature, as I just mentioned. In response, Milan asserted her rights to voice criticism, and in response to Davis specifically, she argued, Davis is explicitly asking RWA to create a world in which I, as a woman of color, must be explicitly barred from using my voice to criticize a novel with a protagonist who shares my race because she believes that she should be immune immune from criticism of the book. In essence, Milan is arguing the question raised by Davis and Tisdale's complaint was about whether RWA should support the rights of writers of color to publicly confront systemic and harmful racism where they see it, or whether the organization would support Tisdale and Davis in their support to avoid facing consequences, including financial harm for actions and writing that had been perceived as racist. The problem with anything that is perceived as is perceptions are wrong. You can have 10 people try this situation. You can have 10 people be involved or be witnesses to the same robbery, and they will all perceive the color of somebody's purse differently depending on where their attention was. If one person says, I perceived the bag was red, and another one says, she had a blue bag, who is right? Are they both right because of their perceptions, or is there the truth of the situation? Feelings also play a big part in the perceptions of someone, and also the current mood of somebody plays a part in perceptions. And really, whether you like somebody or not plays a part in perceptions. The mega problem here is you're free to critique somebody's book. You're free to leave a review because we are all consumers, and published books are consumer products. But there is a difference between leaving a consumer review saying, I didn't enjoy this book, I didn't enjoy this thing, read it for yourself if you really want to, but these are the issues that I had with it, and then going on social media and whipping up a frenzy and pointing at somebody, calling them basically a witch, and they should be burned at the stake because you have perceived them as a witch. What Milan has actually done in this situation, especially using race on both parts, they're white people, I'm an Asian, is she has juxtaposed, well, you have to agree with me or you're also a bad person. Notice how this has framed it as, well, my critique is because this is racist, and if you disagree with me, then you're also racist, which everybody has realized in this situation kind of creates a social pariah type issue. And so it threatens those who are in charge or those who have the power to do something with Milan to judge the situation by saying, well, if you don't agree with me, then bad things are going to also happen to you. So agree with me unless you want to be like these people that I'm targeting. Sounds a little bit mafioso if you ask me, though. I think the mafia has slightly higher morals. This is fun. Among the authors who commented was Sci-Fi NK Jemizin, who recalled a similar shocking moment in science fiction community that led to the ongoing cultural clash that ultimately led to the Jemisin's history-making Hugo-winning three-peat. RWA can recover too, she wrote. It will still take a bloodletting, but it is possible. And recently, over this last week, NK Jemisin has also been leading the charge against a transgender author whose piece she didn't like. The transgender author wrote a piece about her situation and her experience being trans, and I guess Jemisin didn't like the way that it was done and kind of assisted in creating a mob that eventually led the author to take down her work because she was being bullied. Good company, Jemisin. Good company. This article continues that with all the problems mounting and no clear leadership or strong answers forthcoming from the RWA, many members voiced serious apprehensions of the organization's sustainability on December 26th. 28 RWA chapter presidents led by CIMRWA and former board members issued an open letter calling for the resignation of all the members of the RWA board and staff. As far as I know, following the decision, as I mentioned before, and as this article says, Courtney Milan had been suspended from positions of authority and had also been suspended from one-year membership due to this situation. However, following the backlash, the RWA kind of pulled back their punishment, and they're reviewing the whole situation. Also, half of the board's 12 seats are now vacant, and I have a suggestion for that. With half of the seats for the board empty at the RWA, they're looking to fill them. Now, they're thinking about how to hire in diversity. That diversity hires might actually help the situation, appease people, have some sensitivity. But I think you actually need a lot less sensitivity in this organization. So follow with me on this suggestion. hire 6 autistic robots, such as myself. Now, I'm not saying hire me because that is a conflict of interest since I'm doing this video. And I'm not just being offensive. When you're a robot like me, you're less connected to your emotions. You're less likely to respond to situations emotionally. You're less likely to respond to stress emotionally. In fact, when you are sent a drastic situation, you're about following the logic. Now, there's a thing in your brain that when you're emotional, you can't act logically, which is why so many people, when they become insanely emotional, they dip into that crimes of passion because they just can't think anymore, and this makes sense, so I'm going to stab them, and then that problem is gone, and then you get out of the passionate moment, and you're like, oh my gosh, that doesn't make any sense. So, what you need to do is there are too many emotions in this board. You don't have enough people who are actually logical to slow the roll. So what you should probably do is put a man in there. Let's be honest. A thinking man. Or just a bunch of robots. I think Google can hook you up with a couple of Alexas. And when stuff gets emotional, it doesn't affect a computer because the computer looks at the logic. Does this make sense? No. Delete. Emotional appeal does not work on robots. That makes it a lot more fair. Because it's no longer about whether you can get somebody to cry or feel bad for you. It's about whether or not you make sense. Whether or not the evidence is on your side. There's no sidestepping that. So, there you go. On this article titled Love is Dead, How Racism Controversy Blew Up the Romance Genre, if we scroll down a couple of paragraphs, we get to this one that says, it's much more interesting than that, beginning with the fact that Davis was never the central target of the intername, because, we keep hearing about Catherine Lynn Davis, but she was never actually the main subject. Somehow she just kind of got pulled in a lot. A heck of a lot, really. The distinction goes to Sue Grimshaw, a freelance romance editor and former buyer at Borders, who came under fire after another author, Ella Drake, started posting screenshots of some of Grimshaw's liked tweets on August 8th, 2019. I can't see any images here, so I don't know. We already looked at some of the tweets that we could find. It's unclear what prompted Drake to start scrutinizing Grimshaw's internet presence in the first place, but she continued to ramp up her rhetoric over the next few days until, perhaps coincidentally but critically, she learned that Grimshaw had been hired on as an editor-at-large at the Jack's House publishing imprint owned by romance superstar Marie Force. Drake doubled down, writing, quote, I mean, if you want to work with someone who likes Trump's demented tweets, ICE raids, articles calling Elizabeth Warren a hate monger, that's certainly a choice. Before going on to suggest that Grimshaw would abuse her position as an editor by only buying books by white authors. Still, I am amazed how people can make statements like that and face no problems with asking for evidence. Again, hire more robots for your industry. I know it's really, really hard. I see all of the threads that have everybody as NFs, and that is an N and an F for the Myers-Briggs, feely, the emotional, the senses, and the feelings. You need less of those, okay? I know that the industry is like 85% that. You need less of them on your boards, okay? You need at least one thinker that relies on the senses on your board because they go, show me the evidence, and they don't respond to emotions. They'll help keep you chill, I promise. While Drake's first round of tweets hadn't gotten much attention, the hiring announcement from Marie Force spurred a backlash. People began to claim that Grimshaw's racism had been whispered about for years in Romancelandia back channels, with particular focus on her role at Borders at the time when the store notoriously relegated black authors to a separate section. I have to say two things on this. Number one, interesting how it was all whispered and there's actually no evidence. It was just some kind of secret where there's literally no evidence. Even Harvey Weinstein has evidence against him. But somehow, let's just say that everything was whispered, and let's believe it. Okay, time to go. Anybody can do this. Anybody can say, There were whispers for years that Courtney Milan murdered her 5-year-old after raping him and then buried him in the backyard. It's a well-kept secret. Everybody knows that. All you need is one person to say it once, and for a couple of people maybe to repeat it and go, oh yeah, it's a well-kept secret. Oh my gosh, did you hear? Courtney Milan raped and murdered a 5-year-old. Did you know that? Everybody in romance knows that. And then you just have one person say it, and then the media can pick it up and say it, and then one outlet turns into 3 outlets, and it grows and grows, and there was never any of that going on. But you've started a rumor, and it grew. And now the fairy tale you just made up is fact when it wasn't there before. So that's number one. Number two is, this is saying notorious for relegating Black authors to a separate section. Funny story. So I went to a publishing conference a couple of years ago. And there was a Black author there who actually got mad at her agent and the book carriers because they had changed the genre of her book from being Black romance to just romance so that it could be among the other romance books. However, she specifically wanted it to be with Black books. She specifically wanted it set aside on a shelf that was only for Black books. And so she renegotiated so that the tag would be Black and so that it would be placed with the Black romance books. So some people like this. I don't know anything about Sue Grimshaw's past, but having sat through some publishing conferences, there are people who prefer that. There are people who prefer. She says specifically, I want people to know that this is a book with Black romance in it. So if people go looking for Black romance, they can find it. I don't want it mixed in with all the other ones. So there are people that like that. What do you say to that? Another author described receiving a deer in the headlights reaction when she asked Grimshaw about publishing an African-American historical romance at a panel in 2011. Others insisted she killed the careers of countless non-white authors by refusing to buy their books or shelve them properly at Borders in the main romance section. And of course, there were those who liked tweets from people like Diamond and Silk, Charlie Kirk, Candace Owen, and Donald Trump himself. Soon high follower accounts, including Courtney Milan, had coalesced around this narrative that Sue Grimshaw had been placed in a position of power at Marie Force's company despite her well-documented history of racism. And part of that well-documented history of racism, or really what started it, was apparently liking certain tweets of a political side that progressives don't like and have labeled everything racist if it comes from that side. And then you just let all of the rumors roll. How can anybody go with this? Needless to say, reasonable people can disagree about whether racist is the most accurate descriptor for liking a Trump tweet or being poorly prepared for a panel, but Borders' policies of segregating its Black authors in a separate section, which was in the place throughout Grimshaw's tenure at the company, is certainly eyebrow-raising in 2020 and deserves additional scrutiny. Did Grimshaw use her influence to favor white authors over Black ones and keep the books of Black authors separate from the romance categories at large? Fortunately, we have an answer in the form of a quote from Sean Bentley, who managed diversity merchandising for Borders beginning in 2006 and was interviewed frequently at the time about his role in the company about his role as the company's buyer of African-American fiction, including romance. Bentley, who, judging from his LinkedIn photo, is a person of color, defended criticisms of the shelving system of romance writers' report. His remarks were reproduced in the comments of a 2008 blog post. Bentley did not respond to the interview request for publication. Quote, I understand that, but I just don't see it in our sales, Bentley said. What we do see is a disproportionate amount of sales in books written by African-American authors. Borders and Walden Books are the one and only bookstore chains that shelve this way, and we have a significant market share in African-American fiction and studies. End quote. It's also worth noting that absurd racist stereotypes about Black readers, namely that they don't exist, were still prevalent in many parts of the publishing industry at this time. The urban fiction boom of the early 2000s was a wake-up call, and Borders was one of the many companies scrambling to wake up to the realization that they'd been missing out on a massive market of readers who were explicitly seeking work by Black authors. Segregating the authors by race was clearly a ludicrous solution, but considering that it was already receiving pushback in 2008, it's a strategy that Borders would have likely changed if they had had the chance. As it stands, the company went bankrupt in 2010, and we simply don't know how their business practices might have evolved in light of ongoing discussions about diversity in publishing or the massive success of the book The Hate U Give. So again, they're basically crediting, it sounds like they're basically crediting somebody for crimes that they didn't commit, or holding them to a standard that is current as opposed to what was going on at the time when the company was also shifting. Look, this is what you get. How are these people not happy? If you go, okay, Borders was racist because they had this policy of separating these authors out. Well, Borders went bankrupt and closed. Is that not the end goal that you want to see if a company is having racist policies, is that people just choose not to buy there and then it's over? And then the persons who leave there who might have been in charge of those situations, I don't know enough about this situation, but wouldn't you hope that the persons who were in that situation learned from their mistakes and changed over time if you assume that they had poor policies? Isn't that what you want? Or is this some kind of situation where you want somebody to suffer for the rest of their life? Now, if you want somebody to suffer for the rest of their life, that's all for you, but you can't be mad at somebody if they continue to not like you for whatever reason, because you're an ass to them. I'm sorry. I'm probably not going to make it in there. Is there such a thing as redemption in the romance community of progressive authors? Let me know in the comments down below. If you are a progressive romance author, is there redemption, or is there just once bad, you're always considered your worst? If you're once bad and always considered your worst, I'd like you to leave your worst crime ever committed down in the comments below, your worst thoughts down in the comments below, so that I may treat you correctly and appropriately. In the meantime, the allegations that Sue Grimshaw engaged in targeted discrimination against Black authors during her tenure at Borders are hard to parse, which means they're not there. Given Bentley's role at the company, it doesn't appear that she was responsible for buying the books of Black authors, let alone endowed with the influence to make or break their careers. And Courtney Milan's tweet storm about Grimshaw's acknowledges this ambiguity. Quote, we don't know, she wrote, but for decades, Black romance authors heard that there was no market for their work. But why are you laying it on Sue Grimshaw? There is no evidence. You don't know. She was in a position that, Black authors have been writing longer than since Sue Grimshaw was in that position. Why did she become the lightning rod of hate and blame for this specific issue? It was because she liked Trump tweets. And this was all about taking down somebody who did not ideologically conform. Again, the RWA, in regards to how Milan is running it and how the situation looks, it's a pack, okay? It's not there to help authors anymore, and it's the same with the Sci-Fi Fantasy Writing Association. It's the same with the SFWA, is they went through this same thing a couple of years ago, and it's still bad as far as I have heard, where they came after you for ideological differences and they just destroyed you because you did not ideologically conform. Now that's kind of more funny in the sci-fi area, since so many sci-fi books are about these tyrannical governments taking over, these mind copiers, the body snatchers taking over. So it's kind of funny that it happened in sci-fi, but that's what all of this is. Now, other than turning this into a targeted campaign to get rid of people who you don't like their political policies for, there is no other description for what is happening here. Is you find something you didn't like in the industry and then you attach it to some random person that you just want to get rid of. You put all of the blame on them. They had nothing to do with it, but put the blame on them, slap them with racist. It especially sticks if they're white and you're not. And then it's over. Then your target will be destroyed. And that's what this whole situation is reading to me as. Let's continue. That seg in which one person's employment history suddenly becomes a proxy for systemic discrimination in publishing happens so seamlessly that it's easy to miss, but it effectively indicates Grimshaw as in an interesting way. Suddenly, it doesn't matter what she did, it's what she represents. The old guard, a relic of the racist system that diversity advocates want to dismantle once and for all, stubbornly refusing to move aside for progress. So you remember this picture that I brought up that I said, remember it? It is a symbol of exactly what it is they're trying to do. They don't want to help you. They don't want to work with you. They don't want you anywhere near the business. You're a bad person if you have white skin. That is what I'm taking away from this situation. And the RWA, these people that have come into the RWA want to take it over and oust you if you have white skin because they see you as the enemy. And if you don't get on board with these ideas that you're the enemy, they'll allow the peon white people who will just bow at their feet and say, come on, queen, you can step over me. But if you don't do that, they're going to destroy you and they're going to make an example out of you to get all of the other people to either bow or get out the way, bitch. As mentioned, following this backlash, Sue Grimshaw was released from her job at Marie Force because Marie Force was afraid of getting the same backlash that Sue Grimshaw got. Like I said, it's an example, setting an example. You either bow or you get the fire. And then Susan Tisdale hired Sue Grimshaw and protected her against these allegations. And of course, because Susan Tisdale did not bend the knee and say, "You're a racist," Susan Tisdale was also pulled into this. Like I said, Marie Force backed down because she didn't want her house or her job to be firebombed by opinions. Susan Tisdale showed an incredible amount of bravery and courage by stepping in and defending Sue Grimshaw and putting herself in the line of fire. Because writing especially is a very liberal, leftist-dominated area, and it's really hard to have different opinions that are not more to the left. Sue Grimshaw was an example. Marie Force said, "I don't want to suffer that." She stepped back. Susan Tisdale saw what was happening, said, "This is wrong, it's scary, but I'm not going to back down," and went in to defend. Susan Tisdale's move to defend only served to infuriate the community, obviously, because they want submission. And then allegations of racism were swiftly leveled against not only Grimshaw, but Tisdale and everyone that Tisdale was involved with, which includes Glenn Finian Press and Catherine Lynn Davis. And that's how Catherine Lynn Davis was pulled into this. I feel so bad for Catherine. She literally had nothing to do with this, but knew somebody who was involved in this situation. Oh. The new president, Damon Swade, resigned from his position. Following all of this turmoil, the new president, Damon Swade, who is a gay Arab with lesbian mothers, resigned, and he was also called too white, not diverse enough. Riddle me that one. It's worth noting that the anger at the RWA isn't coming out of nowhere. Romance-like publishing overall has been overwhelmingly white for a long time and is struggling now, often unsuccessfully, towards greater inclusivity. Let's take a moment, let's just take a second to understand that America was over 85% white until the mid-60s, and even then, following the 1965 Immigration Act as it changed and our demographics started changing, America has still been a majority white. I do not see anybody complaining about how Japan publishes majority, like 90% plus Japanese content. So why is there such an issue that America publishes content that much more matches the demographic, and it changes as we get there? Because this isn't about it. Diversity and inclusion, as far as I can tell, means no white people. In researching this piece, I read several anecdotal but credible reports of insensitive behavior at the meetings of certain local RWA chapters. That's why I'm saying hire robots. Insensitive behavior is nothing. Grow up. We're adults here. Learn to get through life. Look, nobody gave me an easy time being fat and autistic all of my life. Nobody gave me an easy time for any of my difficulties, and I just had to get over it and figure out how to work in society, not report them to the police. What a time we live in. At this point, some readers will be tempted to shrug and dismiss this controversy as insignificant fringe drama in a community with no wider influence, but in fact, the stakes are extremely high. Romance is a billion-dollar genre, one of publishing's most reliable and resilient moneymakers, and what happens there has major implications on the industry at large. I would also argue that what is happening here is a reflection of what is happening in other industries all across the nation. It is happening in the entertainment, in pretty much every entertainment part of pretty much every part of entertainment industry. It is happening in the private sector. It is happening in the political sector. It is difficult to get away from. And originally, a couple of years ago, we just saw these French attitudes on Tumblr and we were laughing about it, and we saw them on YouTube and we were laughing about it, and now they are in the real world and they're trying to ruin people's lives and kick them out of industry and stop them from doing their jobs. So As much as we can laugh at the situation of silly romance authors and their racism chants, this is a symptom of a larger problem. This is a symptom of a politically, ideologically driven problem that is about blacklisting creators. And it's really not that different from what happened a couple days ago when Vince Vaughn was at a football game and shook Donald Trump's hand, and the internet wanted to cancel him. This is the exact same thing. It is all about politics. And it's not just happening to romance authors. And that's what should scare you. I have a couple more articles. I have a couple more articles on this specific issue. One comes from somebody's personal blog called Teach Me Tonight, Racism and the Corporate Romance Buyer, quote, a little fiasco involving Sue Grimshaw. Racism and the Corporate Romance Buyer, a little fiasco involving Sue Grimshaw, and then another from Jamie Gold, the RWA implosion, how could the problems be fixed? I will link both of these in the description below because I cannot go over them in this video. I can go over them in another video if you're interested. Let me know in the comments down below. But in my closing statements on this issue, I've said it a million times, so I'll say it one more time. If you are a reader, just pay attention to good storytelling. Find the stories that you like. Avoid the stories that you don't like. Avoid the authors that you don't want to support. Whatever. If you're a writer, tell the stories that you have to tell. I will never censor the stories that I have to tell, and I can assure you the stories that I have, somebody is going to be offended by something in all of them. 100%. And I'm ready for that. Because I'm just telling stories. And you know what? Humans are offensive. Humans are messy, they're complicated, they're interesting, they're intelligent, and they're dumb at the same time. Humans are lazy and irrational and thoughtful and loving and passionate. They're the best and the worst at the same time, and you never really know what you're going to get. That's just humanity. Humans are a mess. What can I say? Know that if you're a writer and you're telling the best story that you can possibly tell, I might not like your story. It just might not be my type of thing. I might give it a negative review as a reader because it's just not my type of thing. I might critique you, honestly, if you ask. But I will always stand with your right to tell any story you have to tell. If you ever need an ally in storytelling, you will always have an ally in me to stand by you, to tell your story. Because we all have a unique place in our head, a unique point of view, and a compulsion to write. And I'll never attack you for your point of view. And that's the kind of community I want to foster, and I think we need all across the writing board. There's not a correct way. There aren't correct positions to have as an author. Oscar Wilde said it best in the preface of A Picture of Dorian Gray when he said, "There is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written. That is all. The 19th century dislike of romanticism is the rage of Caliban not seeing his own face in a glass. The moral life of a man forms part of the subject matter of the artist, but the morality of art consists in the perfect use of an imperfect medium. No artist desires to prove anything. Even things that are true can be proved. No artist has ethical sympathies. An ethical sympathy in an artist is an unpardonable mannerism of style. No artist is ever morbid. The artist can express everything. Thought and language are to the artist instruments of an art. Vice and virtue are to the artist's materials for an art." There are definitely ideas and rules that are better, that help create a better story or help tell a story better. But there are no rules of the ideas you have to have, or the political party you have to vote for, or the positions you have to hold in order to tell a good story. People aren't black and white, good and evil. People are a mixed bag. And we have good ideas, and we have bad ideas, and we have unique positions, and we have unique experiences, and we have our obsessions, which cause us to write. And I support your obsession, whether you support mine or not. In closing, I have one more article that I'll link down in the description below. In closing, I have one more blog post, which I'll link in the description down below, called The Implosion of the RWA, and it is a series of events with dates on what has happened. And it looks like it's continuously being updated, because up top it says it was published on the 27th of December, and if we scroll down to the bottom of the article, we've got January 17th, which was yesterday. RW responds to Courtney Milan's letter confirming that former and current members have been released from confidentiality restrictions in order to give relevant information to the independent auditor. That is right. The RWA is currently being audited by an independent auditor, not from the company, to double check the whole situation as it happened and those involved. And in 2 to 3 weeks, my sources say, the results of the audit will come out and we'll get a better picture of what all happened behind the scenes instead of the heresy that's on Twitter. So I hope you'll join me in a couple of weeks when we cover the information brought about from the audit. If you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe, and let me know down in the comments below what you'd like more of. I'm just telling you guys, this stuff is exhausting. Does anybody ever get tired of being outraged? Because I am personally exhausted just from going over this information. How are people so mad? Don't we have books to write? Don't we have books to write? Anyway, if you like this content, please like and subscribe so I know that I'm doing something right. I know this video is long and there's so much information and I didn't even cover it all. If you'd like another video going over some of the other articles that I am linking to, down in the description below, let me know. Like and subscribe so I know that I'm doing something right, and I'll see you next time. Bye. I feel like I need a nap after this.